Imagine a world steeped in violence, pride, and unbelief. Each generation seemed to drift further from the Creator. Sin spread like a shadow that smothered hope. Yet in the midst of this darkness, one life shone like an unquenchable flame. The life of Enoch. Unlike his contemporaries, Enoch did not conform to the corruption around him. He longed for something beyond riches, beyond human passions. While many lived only for themselves, he walked in silence, in prayer, yearning to hear the voice of God. His secret was not in strength or power, but in constant communion with the Creator. While the world mocked faith, Enoch listened to the whisper of eternity. Each day he drew closer to God until his life became a reflection of divine holiness. Enoch lived in an age when unbelief ruled, but his faith made him a prophet. He warned, preached, and revealed the justice of God, not with arrogance, but with firmness and compassion. His message was clear: judgment was coming, and only those who walked with God would be safe. Then, one day, the impossible happened. Enoch was no longer found among men. He did not taste death. The Lord took him to himself as an eternal testimony that it is possible to live in holiness in the midst of sin. The life of Enoch still echoes today, calling us to walk with God. The story of Enoch is not merely an ancient account lost in Genesis. It is a living message that has crossed the centuries, reaching us as a silent invitation. It is possible to walk with God even in the midst of chaos. Ellen White describes Enoch's life as a continual sermon. He did not proclaim only with words, but with his very existence, which radiated faith and holiness. While many were lost in ambition and violence, Enoch sought moments of communion. He withdrew to the fields and mountains where his soul was, lifted up in prayer. With every encounter with God, his faith grew stronger. With every conversation with the Creator, his life reflected more of heaven's light. Thus, his character was shaped until it became a living testimony of divine grace. But the story of Enoch was not preserved merely for admiration. It was written for instruction and inspiration. Ellen White affirms that those who will live to see the coming of Christ without experiencing death must cultivate the same experience as Enoch: purity of life, constant communion, and sincere obedience. This is not achieved by human strength, but by daily walking side by side with the Lord. This leads us to reflect: what does it mean to walk with God today, in times of hurry, distraction, and unbelief? How can we keep the flame of faith alive amid so many opposing voices? Throughout this narrative, we will delve into the stages of Enoch's life and discover that his story is also a call to our generation to live as those who already breathe the air of eternity. The earth in the days of Enoch was no longer the same as the one created in Eden. With each generation, sin sank deeper, like roots tearing through the soil of humanity. Men had learned to defy God with pride, and violence had become a common. Language-cities were growing, filled with ingenuity and vanity. The descendants of Cain had raised altars to human pride, cultivating pleasures without measure. The sound of instruments, the glitter of wealth, and architectural works all sought to drown out the memory of the Creator. But among the descendants of Seth, there were still those who sought God. It was as if two lines were being drawn in history. On one side, corruption; on the other, faithfulness. It was in this setting of contrasts that Enoch was born, the great-grandson of Adam, from an early age. Enoch noticed the difference between what he saw around him and what he heard in the stories of creation. His heart was troubled as he considered how man, made in the image of God, could be so lost in violence and pride. Ellen White describes that Enoch did not conform to evil, while others allowed themselves to be swept away by passion. He sought moments of solitude in the fields and mountains to meet with the Creator. There, far from the noise, he learned to listen to the voice of God. These experiences shaped his character. Prayer was not for him an empty ritual, but a constant dialogue. His faith grew like a strong tree in the midst of the storm. And each day, when returning from his moments of devotion, Enoch radiated a peace that others could see. In the midst of an unbelieving generation, God chose Enoch as a prophet. His message was clear. Judgment was drawing near. He spoke of the coming of the Lord with thousands of angels to execute justice upon the wicked. His voice sounded like a warning amid widespread indifference. Not everyone listened. Many mocked him, calling him a fanatic. Others felt their hearts burn, but chose to ignore the message. Still, Enoch did not give up. His commitment was to the one who spoke to him in secret, and that was enough. Step by step, Enoch learned that walking with God was more than keeping commandments. It was living in the constant presence of the Most High. That presence gave him strength to resist temptation, and courage to speak when the world preferred silence. Thus, his life began to become a visible sermon, while men built cities for themselves. Enoch built a character for God. While they sought perishable riches, he stored up eternal treasures. But everything would change with the birth of a son, a turning point in his journey. Enoch's life was steady in his devotion, but something extraordinary happened when he turned 65 years old, his son, Methuselah, was born. The little baby, wrapped in fragility, brought immense joy to the home. But for Enoch, it also brought a new weight, the responsibility to guide a life in the ways of the Lord. The birth of that child was like a silent calling. If before Enoch already sought after God, now he felt an even greater need to live in intimacy with Him. As he looked into the innocent eyes of the child, he saw the reflection of his own mission: to shape character, to protect, to instruct. How could he do this without walking side by side with the Creator? It was during this time that his faith took a leap. Ellen White comments that fatherhood expanded Enoch's spiritual vision. He began to better understand God's love for mankind. If his human heart could love his Son so deeply, how much greater must divine love be for humanity? This realization transformed the way he lived. Every gesture of care for Methuselah became a reminder of divine grace. When he rocked him, he remembered that God upholds all creation. When he taught him to take his first steps, he saw a reflection of the Lord guiding his fragile children. Daily life began to take on a sacred glow. The Bible states that after the birth of Methuselah, Enoch began to walk with God continuously. This expression was not just a detail. It represented a life marked by daily communion, not by isolated moments. Enoch had learned to live in the constant presence of the Most High. This transformation was reflected in his home. His household, though simple, was filled with peace. The love between him, his wife, and his children was sustained by prayer. There was no luxury or wealth, but there was the joy of knowing that God was present. Yet his faith could not remain confined to the family. The Lord called him to be a voice to a corrupted generation. The same dedication with which he cared for his son would now be extended to the people. Fatherhood made him more compassionate and his message more saturated with love. Enoch, then, began to rise as a preacher. He spoke to the crowds, called for justice, and warned against corruption. He did not preach with arrogance, but with tears. His Father's heart extended to the people, longing for all to be reached by divine mercy. Many mocked him. Others hardened their hearts. But there were always some who listened. The prophet understood that his mission was not to measure results, but to be faithful to the call. While caring for Methuselah at home, he also cared for the lost generation around him. Thus, the birth of a son became a turning point in Enoch's life. The experience of fatherhood led him into a deeper walk with God, and the courage to speak in His name grew each day. But this new calling would not be easy. The prophet would have to face mockery, rejection, and a world that did not want to listen. Time went on, and the voice of Enoch echoed through villages and cities. He was not an ordinary preacher. His words were filled with a power that was not his own, but from the Holy Spirit. He spoke of righteousness, of the coming judgment, and of the urgent need to abandon sin. The book of Jude preserved a fragment of his prophecies. Behold, the Lord came with his holy myriads to execute judgment on all. The message was clear. God would not ignore human wickedness. The Creator would judge the world. This preaching deeply disturbed people. The powerful mocked him, the indifferent laughed, and even some of the religious despised him. They called him a dreamer, an extremist, a man out of touch with reality. But Enoch would not be silenced, for he knew his mission came from above. At the same time, Enoch was not a hermit. He did not live isolated in caves or hiding in the mountains. He mingled with the people, worked among them, visited their homes, and spoke directly to their families. His life was a testimony. His presence was a message. Yet Enoch also knew he could not rely solely on human interaction. To keep the flame of faith alive, he needed moments of solitude with God. He would often withdraw to the fields and mountains, where communion became intimate and profound. In those hours, he renewed his strength to return and speak with boldness. This balance between public life and private communion was the secret of his strength. He was with men, but not contaminated by them. He lived in the world, but kept his eyes fixed on heaven. His heart was a bridge between the human and the divine. Many began to notice that it was not just about words. Enoch's life was consistent with his message. His simplicity, his compassion, and his courage were a continual sermon. He did not only announce judgment, but also pointed the way to hope. Still, the world continued in its corruption, rejected the truth, preferring the comfort of lies. Enoch felt sorrow over this, but remained faithful, remembering that his calling was to preach, not to control results. With every prophecy, with every word, his faith grew stronger. He saw clearly that the future was in God's hands. And even when he seemed alone, he knew heaven upheld him. But something deeper was happening. His communion became so intense that he seemed already to live in another reality. People saw only a prophet. God saw a friend who was walking ever closer to eternity. Enoch's life became increasingly marked by the divine presence. There was no moment when his heart was not lifted up. When he awoke, he prayed. While he worked, he prayed. His way of living, Enoch carried out his daily tasks like any other man of his time, but he did everything in a spirit of worship. The field became an altar, his family became a ministry, and every step was accompanied by faith. This practical spirituality caused admiration. How could someone live in such a corrupt world without becoming contaminated? Some thought he was simply a different kind of man. But those who observed him closely knew. Enoch walked with God. In his moments of retreat, his experience deepened. As he climbed the mountains, he seemed to hear the music of heaven. As he contemplated the stars, he felt closer to eternity. Time and space no longer limited him. His soul lived in two dimensions, earth and heaven. When he returned from these experiences, there was a new radiance in his gaze. His words carried authority. He was not merely a preacher, but someone who spoke as one who knew the heart of God. This both attracted and unsettled those around him. People could not fully understand his faith. For many, it was incomprehensible to live in such intimacy with the Lord. But this was living proof that the impossible becomes reality when the heart is surrendered to the Creator. Little by little, Enoch seemed more a citizen of heaven than of earth. His life was not centered on what was passing, but on what was eternal. He lived on earth as a guest, awaiting the day when his walk would be complete. This constant walk made him a living testimony. He did not merely announce heaven, he already lived it, and his presence among men was a reminder that holiness is possible, even amid darkness. Many felt peace simply being near him. Others, however, were disturbed, for his life exposed their unbelief. Thus, Enoch increasingly became a sign that God was still present, calling people to repentance until the day came when the boundary between the two worlds disappeared. For Enoch, heaven was no longer a distant promise. It was a living reality, so near that God chose to take to himself the one who already lived as if he dwelt in eternity. Then it happened. One day, Enoch was simply no longer found. His absence was not ordinary. Family and friends searched for him, but they understood that something extraordinary had taken place. The man who walked with God had been taken. The Bible records it with simplicity. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Brief words, yet filled with depth. For the first time, a man was translated without tasting death. This event marked history. It was living proof that death is not the inevitable destiny for all. The Lord showed that there is a reward for those who seek Him with all their heart. Enoch became an eternal example for the unbelievers. His translation was a warning. If they mocked his preaching, they could not mock his absence. for the faithful. It was renewed hope. God is mighty to save to the uttermost. The life of Enoch echoed through the generations. It was a constant reminder that walking with God is possible. Even in the midst of the greatest corruption, he lived as a stranger on earth, but was received as a son in heaven. Ellen White describes that the character of Enoch will be a model for those who will live in the time of the end. Purity, unwavering faith, constant communion. This is the calling. His life was not only a testimony, but a living prophecy of what is yet to come. What set him apart was not human perfection, but total surrender. He chose, day after day, to walk with the Lord. And that daily walk led him, step by step, into eternity. Thus, the translation of Enoch was not just an isolated miracle. It was a message of hope that heaven is nearer than we imagine. The God who took him to himself is the same God who calls us today. The story of Enoch invites us to reflect. Are we walking side by side with God, or following the path of the crowd? Every choice, every prayer, every act of faith draws us closer to our farther from eternity. The man who did not taste death still speaks. His life is an eternal echo. It is possible to walk with God. And one day, like him, we will be received by the Lord when Christ comes in glory to gather those who have walked in his ways. The life of Enoch is not just a distant memory. It is a living message that continues to echo through the centuries. He shows us that no matter how corrupt the world may be, it is possible to walk with God every day. His story challenges us not to conform to unbelief, but to seek constant communion with the Creator. Enoch was not a being different from us. He had family, work, and responsibilities. He lived amid temptations and mockery. But he chose to live with his eyes fixed on heaven. His walk was made of simple steps: prayer, faith, obedience, perseverance. And in this way, his ordinary life became extraordinary. Today, the same invitation is extended to us. We do not need to wait for grand signs to seek God. We can begin new in the silence of prayer, in the love devoted to family, in faithfulness, in small things. If we choose to walk with him, we too will be prepared for eternity. The story of Enoch did not end in his time. It continues, and it can also become our story.